So I've been asked to give my view of what the Old Testament says. Now I've been researching the Old Testament for nearly 10 years now, and I've got a fairly unusual view of what it says. So this is my interpretation through my research. You're free to disagree with it, that's your prerogative, but this is what I believe. So today I'm going to look at that odd story in the Old Testament, in Genesis, concerning the nakedness of Noah. Right? So it was, I'll mention the actual verse in a minute, but it's important because it establishes this thing which is completely incorrect. It's called the curse of Ham. The curse of Ham is this idea that Ham was cursed with black skin for his wickedness, and that cast black people as inherently evil. This view comes from Talmudic origins, and it basically says that racism is sanctioned by the Most High. The Most High cursed black people, so they're deserving of hatred, derision, and slavery. And this was indeed the justification of slavery, because again, erroneously, they said that Ham was also cursed to be the servant of servants, so slavery becomes him. The view I have also gives you an explanation of the post-flood giants. So we'll get into it then. So in Genesis 9:18 to 27, it basically says, so Genesis 9:18 to 27, and the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. We'll get back to that later. And Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both of their shoulders, and went in backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backwards, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done to him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. So right there and then, it's not Ham that was cursed, it was Ham's son, right? Because again, it redundantly says, right, Ham was the father of Canaan. Right? It says that it was Canaan that was cursed, not Ham. Okay. So what does Christianity say about this story? So the prevailing thought in Christianity is that Ham saw his father naked and mocked him, and it's a shameful thing. But that sounds a bit too weak, because Noah then woke up and knew what Ham had done to him, like he'd done something physical to Noah. So it can't be that he just sort of saw him naked and then laughed about it afterwards. Yeah, it doesn't seem to fit. Again, if you look at the Talmud, there are two explanations that they give. Right? The first one is that Ham went in there and castrated Noah. Okay. Yeah. Why? Yeah, that's what you do. Is you go in and hack the nuts off your dad. Yeah. The next explanation that the Talmud gives is that Ham went in there and sodomized Noah. Yeah. Again, I think that's the Talmud is an evil book, so I'd say it was projection. Anyway. I don't think that any of those explanations are the true explanation. My reasons for that is that when you look at the word in Hebrew, the word for nakedness, it doesn't necessarily mean that Noah was naked. I believe the word is erva, which is Strong's number H6171, and it includes the meanings nakedness, nudity, shame, pudenda, right, female genitals, and it implies a kind of shameful exposure of female genitals. Then nakedness of a thing, indecency, improper behaviour, exposed, undefended. Now, if any of you know how I break down Paleo-Hebrew words, you don't just choose the meaning that you like. In this case, I just chose nakedness, right? But you take all the words together and see what that feels like to you. Going beyond that, because we're looking at essentially the corrupted Yiddish version of Hebrew, right? Because this word is erva, beginning with an E, well, Paleo-Hebrew didn't have an E. So if you see an E, it would be an A. So if you, again, search through the Yiddish words, you'll find a word ava. Same word, but with an A instead of E, which means it's the same word. Okay, it's just hiding some certain things. So Ava is Strong's number H6172. The meanings of Ava are dishonour and metaphor of nakedness. Right, so you can add those two words to the list. So when you take all those together, it involves female nakedness and indecency and dishonour and being undefended and improper behaviour. They're the key elements here: nakedness, female genitalia, nakedness of one's father's wife, shame and dishonour. To me, that strongly suggests that the offence that Ham committed was an incestuous encounter with his mother. But just in case there are any residual doubts, it says quite plainly in Leviticus 18:8, "The nakedness of thy father's wife shalt thou not uncover, it is thy father's nakedness." So, who was Ham's mother? Well, according to the Book of Jubilees, because, step back a second, Genesis says absolutely nothing about who Noah's wife was. But you can look in the Book of Jubilees and it says Noah took somebody called Emzara to wife. So, Book of Jubilees, chapter 4, verse 33. In the 25th Jubilee, Noah took to himself a wife, and her name was Emzara, the daughter of Rachiel, the daughter of his father's brother. In the first year of the 5th week, and in the 3rd year of it, she gave birth to Shem. And in the 5th year of it, she gave birth to Ham. And in the 1st year of the 6th week, she gave birth to Japheth. But when you look in the book of Jasher, right, it actually says it was somebody called Naamah. So that's book of Jasher, chapter 5, verses 15 to 17. And thou shalt raise up seed, and thy children with thee, in the midst of the earth. And Noah went and took a wife, and he chose Naamah, the daughter of Enoch, and she was 580 years old, and Noah was 498 years old when he took Naamah for a wife. And Naamah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Japheth, saying, God has enlarged me in the earth. And she conceived again and bare a son, and he called his name Shem, saying, God has made me a remnant to raise seed in the midst of the earth. Now, it looks like, here we go, that, did I get this wrong? Japheth, according to the book of Jasher, Japheth was the firstborn, or Japheth was the firstborn, followed by Shem. Right. So, but then in the book of Jubilees, it says that that Shem was the firstborn, and then Ham, and then Japheth. So the order is wrong. Okay, there's a bit of confusion there. Whenever I see confusion in the Old Testament, it means that something's been deleted or changed or sort of shifted out of context. Yeah, it's been deliberately manipulated. So I kind of looked around at various other texts, because again, when you look at other texts, even if they're not real or not properly inspired or whatever, they'll have nuggets of truth in them, because you've got to wrap your lies in a blanket of truth, otherwise they won't be accepted. So you'll find some truths in these books, especially when you're not looking at what the book is trying to the main theme of what the book is trying to push. So you'll find all sorts of details that are sort of side notes. Okay, so when I looked around, I found that Naamah is also mentioned as Noah's wife in the Jewish Rabbah Midrash, and those Jewish commentators identified her as a descendant of Cain. Okay, there's also a couple of books that were translated by Joseph Smith, who was the father of Mormonism. He claimed to have found these ancient texts and translated them. And the first one was the Book of Abraham, sorry. The Book of Abraham, chapter 10, verses 1 to 3. And it says, And when Noah was 450 years old, he begat a son, and called his name Japheth. 42 years later, he begat another son of her who was the mother of Japheth, and he called his name Shem. 8 years later, Noah begat a son of his wife Naamah. So there's a bit of a disconnect here. So it's basically saying that that there was a wife of Noah who begat Japheth and Shem, and then 8 years later, Noah begat a son with his wife Naamah. So there seems to be like this idea that Noah had two wives. Okay, so 8 years later, Noah begat a son of his wife Naamah, who is of the seed of Cain. So that's a third reference to Naamah, and the second reference that she was of the seed of Cain. And he called his name Ham, for he said, through him will the curse be preserved in the land. So, the second book I had a look at was the Book of Moses. So the Book of Moses chapter 8, verse 12. And Noah was 450 years old and begat Japheth. And 42 years afterwards he begat Shem, of her who was the mother of Japheth. See that separation again. And when he was 500 years old, he begat Ham. So both these accounts suggest that Noah had two wives, and the first bore Japheth and Shem, and it was Naamah who gave birth to Ham. I actually looked in the Quran, and the Quran actually hints that Noah had another wife, and that wife stayed behind. She didn't believe in the flood, and she stayed behind with a fourth son of Noah called Yam. Okay, so he and his mother disbelieved Noah and refused to board the ark, and they chose instead to climb a mountain and got drowned in the flood. So this Naamah is an interesting character because she's only mentioned once in the Old Testament. So we have the lineage of Cain is mentioned, but and it literally goes out of its way to mention Naamah and then say nothing more about her. That's it. It's like, why bring up this character and literally just don't say anything about her, especially when it's talking about a woman, because the Old Testament doesn't really speak about women very much. But in this case, it gives you the lineage of Naamah, but then says nothing more about her. Somebody told me once that the Most High doesn't build bridges to nowhere. So, to my mind, there's more to that story, but that's been cut out of the Old Testament. What have we got here? There was a book. Let me see if I've got it here. So there was a book that was released in 2019. It was called The Book of Lamech of Cain. Now, I think it's backwards for you there, but so it was translated and released from the Vatican archives. They actually admitted to having archives for the first time. And there's a whole chapter 8 of this book, that's devoted to describing Naamah and her marriage to Noah. So I'm going to read a few parts of this. So Lamech of Cain, chapter 8, verse 3. It says, and Naamah was born pale, and not with the complete mark of the line of Cain. Now, the mark of Cain, again, that's been theorized to mean all sorts of different things, but in this book, interestingly enough, it literally tells you what the mark of Cain was. So again, book of Lamech of Cain, it's chapter 1, verse 2. It says, Cain, the forefather of Lamech, who was marked with leprous whiteness. Right? You don't blame me, blame the book, right? So the mark of Cain was leprosy, which was skin turning white at the time. In chapter 8, when it's talking about Naamah, it says Naamah was born pale and not with the complete mark. So it's kind of hinting that she was wicked, but not quite as wicked as all the rest of her lineage. So chapter 8, verse 56. Before Noah and Naamah wed, Lamech instructed her not to tell Noah that she had lain with the Nephilim in her youth. So the book actually explains that Naamah actually had sex with the Nephilim, and but she didn't give birth, so she wasn't So she literally didn't give birth to any giants or anything. And then Lamech told her, don't tell Noah that you've been sleeping around with the Nephilim, as you do. So Lamech of Cain, chapter 8, verse 58. For Noah sought a wife that was upright and pure, and Naamah was not these things. And none of those things were available to Noah at that time, because everybody was corrupt. Verse 62 of this book, okay, and it literally finishes off. And the corruption that Naamah fostered in secret, and other things, which is other things, well, that was in brackets because it couldn't be read, it couldn't be interpreted. So the corruption that Naamah fostered in secret from Noah and other things, are they not told in the first book of Naamah? So that's exactly the same way that the book of Jasher is mentioned in the Old Testament. Even though the book of Jasher isn't in the Old Testament, it's alluding to the fact that it should be. Jasher meaning the book, the upright, true record. And it's spoken of in the sense of, it must be true, it's written in the book of Jasher, isn't it? And so the same thing is here. It's saying this is true because it's been written in the first book of Naamah. But here's the other thing. If there's a first book, it's alluding to the fact there's a second book. So I think, and I might get into this later, that the first book talks about the first part of her life being being with the children of Cain and then marrying Noah. And I think the second book, and this is just a guess on my part, would be about after this event with Noah and the nakedness incident. And maybe I'll get into that later on. So it seems plain to me that Ham's offence was that he had an incestuous sexual encounter with his mother, and she conceived and bore Canaan. And that's why Noah cursed Canaan, not Ham, because Canaan would actually be physically cursed by this union. Right? It would also explain why Genesis goes way out of its way to point out, rather redundantly, that Ham was the father of Canaan. So as if to make sure that Canaan, who is the son of Noah's wife, wouldn't be mistaken for one of Noah's sons. Okay, so it literally says in Genesis 9:18, and the sons of Noah that went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. And then in Genesis 9:22, it says, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren without. So that it now makes sense to me. It would also explain that why the cursed offspring of Canaan were the post-flood giants, the Canaanites. Right? Because as a representative of the wicked seed of Cain, right? So Naamah was his mother, right? So he got the bloodline of Cain, right? Then he procreated with his own mother, and so concentrated that DNA into his children. So that's why they, a lot of them became these giants. Okay, and Naamah being of the line of Cain, well, perhaps she didn't really play a passive role in this incestuous affair. There are accounts that Ham and Naamah were married, or they went off together and went to the land of Shinar. Now, I remember when I was researching years ago, I found this account that they ran off together and dwelt in Shinar, and Naamah eventually became the consort of Nimrod. But try as I might, I can't find any reference to it anywhere else now. It's gone. I might have to do some more research on that. But yeah, I did have it. It's gone now. So Canaan essentially was cursed 3 times. Yeah, not only as a child of incest with the seed of Cain in him, but he was cursed by his grandfather, Noah, to be the servant of servants. But he also incurred further curses because he went on to take the land that was allocated to Shem. Right? So that's in the book of Jubilees. So book of Jubilees, chapter 10, verse 29. It says, "And Canaan saw the land of Lebanon to the river of Egypt was very good. And he went not into the land of his inheritance to the west, that is to the sea, and he dwelt in the land of Lebanon, eastward and westward from the border of Jordan and from the border of the sea," which is the land of Canaan. "And Ham, his father, and Cush, and Mizraim, his brothers, said unto him, Thou hast settled in a land which is not thine, and which did not fall to us by lot. Do not do so, for if thou dost do so, thou and thy sons will fall in the land, and be accursed through sedition. For by sedition you have settled, and by sedition will thy children fall, and thou shalt be rooted out forever. Dwell not in the dwelling of Shem, for to Shem and to his sons did it come by their lot. Cursed art thou, and cursed shalt thou be beyond all the sons of Noah, and by the curse by which we bound ourselves by an oath in the presence of the holy judge, and in the presence of Noah our father." So unfortunately, Canaan and all the children of Noah were bound by an oath not to take the lands of other people. So there's a section of our population who should take note of that. Those who rampaged around the earth, colonising and conquering other people's lands. Right? The curse of Noah is still in effect, guys. Okay. So in the book of Jubilees, again, chapter 9, verse 14, it said, "And thus the sons of Noah divided unto their sons in the presence of Noah their father, and bound them all by an oath, imprecating a curse on every one that sought to seize the portion which had not fallen to him by lot." So, as I said, that curse is still in effect. So, the events that transpire later on in the book of Genesis now make more sense. The Most High didn't give the Israelites returning from Egypt somebody else's land. That's always been something that stuck in my mind. That why did the Most High say to Abraham, well, I'm going to give your children the land belonging to these people. It doesn't seem fair. But now it makes sense that the land of Canaan was never Canaan's to begin with, right? But it was Shem's inheritance, right? And giving that land to the Israelites, the Most High was really just setting things in its proper order and returning the land to its rightful owners. Yeah. As I said, the Christian view of the Old Testament doesn't make sense, but when I look at this story and do a little research and some intuitive leaps, right, then the story seems to make sense. So hope I've helped you to make sense of it. If you could follow the way my mind works. Thanks for listening.